for joining us in this session called Cybercrime as a Sustained Business. It's based on research conducted by Professor Calvin Nobles, Professor Sharon Burton, and Professor Daryl Burr. But the speaker today will be Calvin Nobles. Dr. Nobles is the chair of the Department of Information Technology and Management at the Illinois Institute of Technology. His research interests include cybersecurity, information security, and human factors engineering, data security, vulnerability of autonomous vehicles, IoT, and smart devices. Dr. Nobles is the recipient of the Colonel Charles Young Leaders Award and the Commander 7th Fleet Cryptologic Excellence Award. I will give now the floor to Dr. Nobles.
Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate that. And thank you all for taking the times out of your busy schedule to attend this session. When I was looking over the agenda, there are some really great sessions going on right now throughout the day. But I really want to, just give you all a shout out and a thank you for attending this session. This session here is about, cybercrime and the impact that it's having on business, not just business, but also from a government perspective. Cybercrime is a growing phenomenon. It's a phenomenon that really is not surprising, but it's really sustained. And it's almost like with cybercrime, when companies and governments work harder to shore up and improve their cybersecurity defense measures and postures, cybercriminals always seem to be 1 or 2 steps ahead of us. And so this is why cybercrime is really a sustained business. It's very attractive to malicious actors. And we're going to talk about that today. And we're going to talk about, here's some of the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, cybercrime defined, problems with defining it, the cost of cybercrime. We're going to talk about the different types of cybercrime. And we're going to, on one slide is very important to me, that's the enablement of cybercrime. What's causing it? What are some things that really enabling it to set root in our day-to-day activities in our government and our businesses? And then we're going to talk about the cyber threat environment, and we're going to talk about how to counter cybercrime. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I want to be respectful of your time. And so when we talk about how to define cybercrime, when we was looking in the literature, there's a lot of literature written on the topic of cybercrime. One of the areas that really caught our attention was how it was really defined. And this is not something as easy because cybercrime is not just something that's local to the United States. This is a global issue that countries all over the world are fighting, trying to get a control and trying to mitigate and eradicate cybercrime. So think about what that means in terms of researchers and practitioners really trying to define cybercrime. And just so for the sake of when we did the research, we just based cybercrime on the definition on the screen, as a computer-related activity that are illegal or illicit by specific stakeholders and conducted via an electronic system. That is a very broad definition, but we really have to understand what we're talking about. When we're talking about the digital sphere that we now use and on a daily basis, what companies really rely on to advance their business, to be international stakeholders, to be international entities, we got to understand it's really hard to define it. The problem with it, though, is that when you got different countries that view cybercrime differently, it leads to all kinds of problems, especially in the literature. As a researcher, it was very challenging for us to say, which definition do we really want to go with? Some of them are like the definition we use. In fairness, it's kind of broad. Some definitions were very specific. And the problem it leads to is that we have no universal definitions really to define cybercrime. For instance, if I was given this conversation over in South Africa, or over in the UK, or over in Japan, this definition might not work well within their legal system in that particular country. So you have to be very careful to understand the legal framework of that particular country when you're talking about cybercrime. For an example, when we talk about cyber espionage in this country, we view cyber espionage as a cyber crime. In other countries, they don't view cyber espionage as a crime. They don't have any legislation or any laws or any policies indicating that it's a legal activity. So these are the type of things we run into and we have to discuss when we talk about how to really define cybercrime. And to the extent What is the cyber sphere that we're talking about? Is it just our cell phones? Is it our internet? And so we have to really open it up and be broad and have a deeper conversation about how do we really define cybercrime. And I think the definition that we used earlier really captures it very well, because we say computer-related activities. Even though we're talking about computer-related activities, it doesn't mean that we're just defining it to computer-related. It also means your cars. Our cars are connected to the internet now. Our homes are connected to the internet now. And so we have so much expansion in terms of digitization and what's going on. Cybercrime is anything that's computer-related activity. And so I believe that's the definition that's really easy to work with in this aspect. And because there's so much confusion around this, how we define cybercrime, it leads to problems in prosecuting cyber criminals. Now, in fairness, I have to say this because I don't want to be one-sided here in this discussion. There are known cases where international law enforcement organizations, national level law enforcement organizations, as well as at the state level and sometime in the city level organization, have worked together to pool resources to prosecute cyber criminals. But it's very exhausting. And it is something where a lot of organizations don't have a dedicated force to pursue, because it is exhausting, especially when the cybercrime is occurring in the United States, but these malicious actors are housed or sitting in another country. There's a lot of laws and a lot of legislation and a lot of red tape and bureaucracy that have to be cleared and removed so that these international organizations and local organizations can work together to prosecute cyber criminals. So the one thing that I really want to bring attention to is the cost of global cybercrime. And so in 2015, what we said the global cost of cybercrime is going to be $6 trillion. And that was between 2015 to 2020. Well, to our surprise, what we noticed and what researchers are forecasting now is that the growth rate of cybercrime has been about 15% per year. And so now they're forecasting the cost of global cybercrime between $10.5 million trillion in 2025. So if I had to go to a board and write this on a board and list all the companies with a GDP, there's only 2 countries that will be listed above this $10.5 trillion. And that will be the United States, followed by China, and then the global cost of cybercrime. As you can see, the cost of cybercrime is not something that we should take lightly, because when companies are paying money to deal with incidents and cyber attacks due to cybercrime, that's money that's preventing their growth. That's money that's preventing them from investing in technology. And so we have to take that into account, that this money is really countering to what the organizations were designed for and organizations are trying to do. And so the other thing we got to talk about here is in the United States, there are about, I believe I read something, and there was about 30 million small businesses. And that meaning these small businesses could be from 1 person to up to 100 persons. In some cases, a little larger than that. But they make up, 43% of cyber attacks are aimed at small businesses. And we got to start asking the questions, why? Why are small businesses attacked? And the reason small businesses are attacked, because one, the next statistics down there, only 14% of small businesses can defend themselves. Having a cybersecurity defense arm or capability is very expensive, and it's something that has to be done continuous. And so that is why a lot of small businesses struggle with defending themselves. Now let's put it in a different perspective. When we're talking about our global supply chain, a lot of our global supply chain rely on small businesses to feed into that larger supply chain. Think about it here locally in the United States, where our larger companies really rely on these smaller organizations to provide services or products that their organization can't provide. And so that supply chain is where a lot of our small businesses come into play. And because they're coming into play, think about malicious actors attacking the smaller businesses downstream. And then what happens? Those cascading effects of attacking the smaller companies, and allow malicious actors to travel upstream to where they can then attack larger businesses. So this is why the cost of global cybercrime has to get our attention. I believe it has our attention, and we have to start thinking about this differently, because this is money that, you know, malicious actors are actually taking away from our governments and from our small businesses, our larger businesses. This money, most of us will agree on this. This money can be invested well somewhere else. And so, I just want to get your attention real quick here, just to talk about a few things that's really enabling, you know, I don't want to say that are really leading up to cybercrime. That's how cyber criminals are leveraging these type of attacks to wreak havoc on organizations. And so when you look at the frequency of ransomware attack from 2016 to 2021, that in 2016, we're talking every 40 seconds, there was a successful ransomware attack. In 2021, we saw that every 11 seconds, there was a successful ransomware attack. And so you can see the pace at which these ransomware attacks are happening are beginning to increase. And so one of the things that we realize is that 95% of all cyber attacks are done from phishing attacks, meaning that somebody has been specifically targeted, or groups of people are being specifically targeted, hoping that somebody will fall victim to the social engineering attack, which lead to things like a ransomware attack. Ransomware attacks are very seldom done as a standalone act. They are always done in duality with something else, like a phishing attack. And this slide here just talks about the average days that it takes for someone to, discover, a data breach. There's countries out there that are really great at being very manipulative, and also being very great at being able to be in our networks and stay in our networks for a long amount of time before they can go dormant in our network and we won't even know it. So look at this, 197 days. In 197 days, a country or a person can be in your network and do a lot of damage. So imagine, that's well over 6 months. Imagine if they put in a remote access where they can, remote in and out of your network without you knowing it and start exfiltrating your information. This is why it's so important that you have a layered defense to prevent this. But again, here I just want to talk about, look at the cost of a data breach. We'll just say $3 million here. As it starts to scale up beyond 30 days, that cost starts to go up exponentially. We're talking about $4.25 million. And then the longer it goes, the more money it's going to cost to recover from that data breach. And so when we talk about, what are companies doing? And so a lot of people say, well, companies are not working hard to protect me. Some companies are not, but in most cases, most companies are, especially companies in regulated industries where they have a responsibility to have a cybersecurity program to protect not only your data, but their data as well. And so you look at the global spending on cybersecurity products and services, man, $1 trillion, that number is going up exponentially. And we see the growth on that, 12 to 15% year after year. And you can see the size of the bag here in the graphic, but that bag is getting larger, larger, and larger. And the reason being is because companies are investing more money because malicious actors are very sophisticated. They're working together to pull off the cyber crimes. And we're not talking about cybercrime as to give any type of positive credence to it. We're talking about it from a negative aspect. But we also have to be very fair about it and say it is a sustained business for malicious actors and nation states who are conducting these type of operations. And so I will get to the questions. I see your questions and I will get to them. And so we talk about that, who's behind the data breaches? And so I love this slide because it really gives us some insight into who's doing what. And remember, a data breach is also not done, in a singular operation. It's also done and what I like to call in terms of vulnerability training, where a group of actors or some nefarious actors work together and they look at the vulnerability of an individual or a company or a government and they attack those vulnerabilities. And the reason they attack those vulnerabilities is because they're looking for the opportunity to get inside of the network, traverse the network, be in there as long as they can without being caught, and looking to wreak havoc in terms of exfiltrating data or getting to your prized possessions, your intellectual property, whatever they can get to wreak harm. Their motivations for the attack, it differs from group to group, and we'll see that later in another slide in there. But just to show you that who's behind the data breaches, 70% outsiders. Now, this number really caught my attention, and the reason it caught my attention is because I'm like, who's the other 30%? You know, again, you know, sometimes a data breach happens because there's something called unintentional incidents or unintentional accident where people inside the organization do something where they didn't mean to do it. And so I'm thinking that might be the other 30% where it comes in, where, as a matter of fact, if you look at the last box over here, it makes sense. It took me a couple of minutes to really understand this slide when I first saw it, because you can add the first two together and get you 100%, right? But then again, let's talk about some of the other things on this slide. Organized criminal groups, 55%. Four more, 4%. Multiple non-partners, 1%. Partners, 1%. And this just gives us some idea that companies are not just facing one particular group or one bad person. They pretty much are facing a regimen of bad actors who are looking to do bad things by getting in their network and get into their prized possessions. I promise you, I get to your questions. And so I love this slide here because when doing the research, we was able to look at the top business industries suffering from cybercrime. And so when you look at 2018, let's start on the right side first. You know, we talk about our business sector, our private sector. Wow, look at that. And then we talk about healthcare, and then banking is always going to be there. You know, government is going to always, you know, be there, education and energy sectors. But look at what happened in 2022. Public administration, they started going after our governments, not just our large governments, but also our state governments, our municipalities, and some of our smaller governments throughout the world. And so again, to just show you a shift. Why are they targeting public administration? Because they get access to people information. And once you get access to people information, you can sell it on the dark web. It's worth a lot of money. Healthcare and pharmaceuticals, look at that. Healthcare is always between 2018 and 2022 is number 2. So it remains steady at number 2. The reason being is because the healthcare environment is very lucrative, especially if you can get someone health insurance information, PII, or other sensitive information. You can essentially become that person. And there's also a demand for it on the dark web to get this information, you know, and sell it. There's no surprise that finance and insurance and banking and all that and credit are going to be there at number 3, holding steady. There's no surprise to that at all. But what surprises to me is how education and research came up to number 4 here in 2022. And the reason being that is because malicious actors know that the government relies a lot on educational institutions to provide critical research. And so because of that, universities are constantly under attack. Think about earlier this year, there was one university, I think it was on the East Coast, where they was hit with a cyber incident, and they was unable to recover from it to the extent that they had to, you know, close the school. That is really sad, and that goes to show you the amount of extensive damage that an incident can really cause you. And of course, retail. The retail industry, again, that's all of us. That's all of our credit cards. That's all of our store cards. That's all of us. And it's, again, this here is a huge industry where there's a lot of opportunities. And so that's why it's up there. And so, again, where there's a large population where people can be taken advantage of, this is what cyber criminals are looking to do. Well, they can attack in large numbers, and they only need 1 or 2 people to be successful. But think about it, when they hit a corporation, let's think about the Equifax. How many records was an Equifax? 143 million. So just think about that. That's a lot. And so I just want to, and I want to say, part of the problem with, understanding this is also terms used to classify cybercrime. Of course, today we use cybercrime. In the past, we used computer crime, electronic crime, internet crime, digital crime. And when I'm studying this, I'm like, what difference is it? Well, it really makes a difference because as technology evolves, as we evolve, in order to have a legal understanding and a legal footwork to be successful at prosecuting these cyber criminals, we have to be able to describe where the crime is taking place. And so that's why it's so difficult across many different countries to make this happen, because people, we look at the different definitions we use to classify cybercrime. Let's look at the types of cybercrime. We just looked at the different names of all the different types of cybercrime. Now look at, the different names we call cybercrime, and these names have morphed into, the different things over time as technology has advanced. But let's look at the different types of cybercrime. Phishing, identity theft, cyber grooming, copyrights, soliciting, producing child pornography, financial theft, cyber stalking, business email compromise. And so these are just some of the top types of cybercrimes. And this list is growing because as the digital sphere continues to evolve, there's different types of cybercrimes that we're beginning to see surface. For instance, like cyberbullying, and we didn't put that up here, but that is definitely a cybercrime. The other thing that we see, we talk about in our article that we wrote for publication for this, is that think about, pornography. A lot of people don't realize that there is a felony charge when you take certain pictures and post it on the internet or send it to somebody. Different states are different. States are different, have different legislation, different laws for that. But a lot of us don't really get into understanding the law behind sending certain type of pictures that are very provocative. And then we also got to start thinking about how people are selling, sexual services over the internet. Those things we haven't really came up with a classification or name for that type of cybercrime, and we definitely not really seeing it in the research literature at this point. Now, I speculate in the future we'll see a lot more literature on it, but I think what's going to have to happen first is that we come up with a name for that type of cybercrime. I promise I will get to you all's questions. And so this slide right here is very important. We talk about the enablement of cybercrime. And so how does it happen? How does cybercrime become sustained? And not only that, a sustained business for malicious actors in some nation states and any other person or a group of people or terrorist organizations that want to inflict harm on people through the internet. One of the reasons they're able to do so is because everything is so hyper connected today. I think about my car when I commute into work, how I plug my phone in and my infotainment system come up, and now everything I do, I can work it from my infotainment system and my satellite radio and everything. I'm so connected. When I get out of my car, my phone moves with me. When I get into my office, I have my phone, I have my computer, I have my iPad, I have so many other things where some of us are over-connected, and because we're so hyper-connected, we are creating a larger surface attack area where we can expose or we can overexpose ourselves. And we haven't even started talking about social media yet. And so when we add social media in there, and we add every other thing that we're using, a lot of us don't realize that our digital footprint is way big and way large. And that creates opportunity for you to potentially become a victim of cybercrime. The research also tells us when someone is a victim of cybercrime, they're not just a victim once. People are re-victimized 2 or 3 times. And it's not because they wake up and say, I'm gonna be re-victimized and do a cybercrime today. It's because they haven't really took a look at their cyber hygiene and look at their footprint and find ways how they can reduce themselves digitally so that they're no longer exposed like a neon light, but they're somewhat, surrounded by some cybersecurity defenses where they have better protection. And that not only goes for people, that goes for businesses, that goes for organizations. Because when a cyber criminal is looking to attack a business, he's not looking to take that business head on. He's looking for vectors in that business. How do I gain access to ABC Corporation? He said, I know they got people there. I know they got a CEO. I know they got corporate officers. So potentially, I can use them as an interest into the organization. And that is why people as an attack vector, we're seeing this over and over and over again, is because this is an area where organizations really struggle the most. We struggle the most with helping people, organizations understand that human behavior in cybersecurity is under research, is underexploited, in some cases is underappreciated. But that is how cyber criminals are gaining access into our largest corporations, into our government, even into our own cybersecurity sphere, is because they're using us as an attack vector. And these attacks are very sophisticated. They are very, very real. I mean, these cyber criminals are doing their homework. Remember, they got 24/7 to sit and look at you. And it might not just be one person looking at you. When I say you, I mean, we're speaking hypothetically here, but also they got an army of people looking at potential targets. They're looking at your social media. They're looking what they can find on the internet, because all of us have a digital footprint, whether we know it or not. We have a digital footprint, and from that digital footprint, they can start to case you, just like how law enforcement case criminals. They flip the script and they start casing us as individuals, because that people as an attack vector gives them insight into who we are and what we're doing. And a lot of us haven't really disassociated ourselves from where we work. You go to our LinkedIn profile, it's listed there. In some cases, it's required to be listed there because you are somewhat of a marketer for your organization, especially if you're in a very senior position. And then we just look at digitalization. Like I said it before, we're very connected. Our phones, our cars, wherever we go, from our banking. The banking industry is like, your bank is no longer the physical location on the city block. Your bank is your mobile phone, and you can bank anywhere in the world where you have access. And so, and think about the Internet of Things. Think about everything we have that's connected. I know when I travel, I can access my security system like most of you, and you can see what's going on at your home. You think about our appliances in our house. We have smart appliances. These things are continuously connected. The one thing we know about the Internet of Things, especially these devices that are leveraging Internet of Things, they have not always been developed with a strong sense of cybersecurity capability. And so we have to take that into account. How much of my Internet of Things or my smart appliances did I really want connected to the internet? And so the other ability that really enables cybercrime is the ability to remain anonymous. That is a huge strategic advantage for cybercriminals. The ability to inflict havoc on people, organizations, and government and not be discovered. And that's what makes it so difficult. In one sense, you think about it, it's kind of like asymmetric warfare. If I can inflict pain or some type of digital warfare on this particular company to gain access to their intellectual property or their financial resources, or do account takeovers for people banking accounts, why not do it? Because I have the means to do it. And see, the one thing we have to consider is that even though all the technology that we're developing in the world today is to make our lives better, there are people out there who are going to leverage it and who are going to exploit it for negative reasons. And we have to be aware of that. And that's what's driving all of this behind cybercrime, where we're looking to leverage the good of being connected. We're looking to leverage the awesomeness of being in a digitized society. there are people that's going to take advantage of us because we are connected. And that's why we have to play cybersecurity defense on a daily basis. The other thing is our threat environment is hyper connected. Cyber criminals are looking for ways to exploit you and your organization on a daily basis. The very things we use, we have to continuously make sure that our platforms are updated and the vulnerabilities are mitigated. And that's why we continuously get software updates for our computers, for our phones, because there's different threats in the environment. Once these threats are known and cyber criminals start leveraging them, then we have a responsibility to react. But that cyber threat environment is continuously moving. Look at it like shooting at a moving plane. It's constantly moving. And because it's constantly moving, cyber criminals are developing capabilities much faster than we can engineer cybersecurity defenses. And so that's one of the advantage of the strategic advantage of being anonymous, is you can engineer these malicious payloads and these attacks on us while we're still trying to focus on cybersecurity defenses and to answer from incidents that happened 6 months ago. So when it's not a one-for-one. It's not you move, I move. It's okay. It's going to take me some time to engineer defense things. And so when we look, who are the threat actors and what are their motivations, right? And so when you look at this is really a great layout to help us understand that when we look at the motivations for these different cyber threat actors, for nation states, geopolitical, that kind of makes sense. We've seen some of this in the war between Russia and Ukraine, right? Cyber criminals, they're looking to make money. Think about people in less developed countries who are really struggling economically. Cyber attacks and conducting cybercrime is a way for them to make money. And we're not saying to say, go out and become a cyber criminal. No, that's not what we're saying. We're saying that we also got to understand, as we look to leverage technology for the positive aspects of it, people are going to be looking for ways to do it from a negative aspect. Hacktivists, they're looking for an ideology. They just want people to know that they're able to do these things. And so on, insider threats, discontent. And so we talk about cybercrime. Cybercrime doesn't always have to come from people in other countries. It could come from what's internal to your organization. You do have people who are insider threats, and these people are conducting what we call intentional actions to derail or to cause harm to your organization and through a cybersecurity means. And so this threat environment, when you think about all the different type of cyber threat vulnerabilities that we have out there, believe me, cyber criminals are well aware of what these vulnerabilities are. And earlier, you heard me talk about vulnerability training, where they will put 2 or 3 vulnerabilities together, and they will find a way to come up with a payload or some type of way to attack you using attacking those vulnerabilities within your organization. And so, again, you hear me talk about cyber criminals can engineer attacks faster than organizations can develop cybersecurity solutions. Not only can they engineer these attacks and these capabilities faster, but they can do it very cheaply. For instance, if you go on the dark web, you can buy a malicious capability for as little as 99 cents. And so, and this, I'm not saying this to say we should, I'm a cheerleader for these individuals. I'm just highlighting why it's sustained. It's because that strategic advantage right there is key when you can engineer attacks faster than they can defend. And so that's what's happening. They constantly attack it. It's relentless. If our organization was to tell us how many attacks that they mitigate on a daily basis, it will be just absolutely mind-boggling to see what they are up against and what they're facing when they're trying to protect their infrastructure from attack. Cyber criminals have advanced skill set. We have to come to grips with that. Now, we're not saying every cyber criminal out there has an advanced skill set. We're not saying that at all, but they have advanced skill sets and they work together. When they work together, they're more lethal. And this is why cybercrime has become sustained in that aspect, is because they're able to pool together their resources and their targets, and they become very surgical and how they operate. It's on, I mean, like I know for me, this morning I got 2 texts from a number that I didn't recognize, and they were just like, hi. And, you know, again, somebody is trying to engage me for a conversation. That conversation will lead to a friendship, and eventually, when that person feels very comfortable with me, they will ask me for something or do something to me that I'm not expecting. So we have to be very mindful of it. Cybercrime is very lucrative. Very lucrative. I mean, you think about the cost of a medical record, you say, well, a medical record can sell on the dark web for $30. Well, one medical record, not that attractive. But when you have 10,000s of medical records, or in some cases where they get millions of files, now you say millions of files times 30, but you do the math. Because this information that they're selling on the dark web might not be of interest to us, but it's of interest to somebody on the dark web who's looking to engage in nefarious activities. And so this is why it's very lucrative. And this is why they use us to target our employers, our governments, and just other entities that are digitally connected, because they're looking for that home run, that lottery type attack that's going to yield many records or to accounts that they can take over. And they're looking for a heavy and healthy payday. And there's low probability of legal action, because remember, what we consider a cybercrime in the United States might not be considered a cybercrime in another country. Now, most times, you know, we can work with other countries to come to an agreement, but if their laws and their legislation doesn't identify it as a cybercrime, there's very little we can do. And this is why the United Nations is playing a huge role in working with companies to come up with a standardized definition of what cybercrime is, so we can actually start pursuing and prosecuting some of these cyber criminals. Until we have healthier numbers and prosecution, cybercrime will always be sustained the way it is today. And so when you look at it, let's look at some of our nation state supported cybercrime. And look, nation states engage in this type of behavior because it's an interest of their national security in some cases, right? So the cyber, we look at cybersecurity, we gotta look broader when we start talking about nation states. Nation states look at, just don't look at it from a cybersecurity lens, look at it from a cyber warfare lens. Because, for instance, you think about a nation state, say China. China's like, why do I need to, you know, deploy a submarine to go and do put a kinetic effect on the United States when I can just shut down their banking system or shut down their power grid? Then I don't have to send my submarine in harm's way. Again, it's, you see at the bottom of the slide, it's very asymmetric in thinking, but it's also very capable. When China has 400,000 individuals supporting cybercrime, that's very difficult to compete. And so how do we, and as a nation, as a person, or as a business, a government, come together to mitigate this type of behavior, so that to make sure that we are eradicating cybercrime from our country? And then again, I mentioned this earlier, some cyber criminals engage due to poor economic conditions. This is what a lot of the research is telling us. For like over, and you see this over in Nigeria, you see a lot of people in Nigeria engaging in this nefarious activity, one, because of economic conditions, but also because it works. It works. People are successfully attacked every day. And so once they get that habit of doing it, they continuously do it. And a lot of people who are attacked never come out and say they're attacked. They're ashamed. They don't want to be shamed for being attacked or falling for a phishing attack or a social engineering attack where they get taken advantage of. And so cybercrime as a service is something that a lot of cyber criminals offer. You can go on the dark web and get a service like cybercrime as a service. Not only do you pay for the cybercrime as a service, it comes with 24-hour support. This is fascinating to me, that they have taken the time to develop a nefarious business that's looking to do harm, but they set it up using the same business models that legitimate companies are using. Then you can get ransomware as a service. That's why we see that ransomware go from what, 40 seconds now to 11 seconds for when we are experiencing a successful ransomware attack. And so this is how cybercrime becomes a sustained business, because there's just too many, it's very opportunistic. And with us not being able to really define cybercrime in a sense, universally across the globe, it becomes more problematic. So what can we do? We can leverage best practices. We can do things like develop a strong cybersecurity program. Now, here's the deal. When you talk to cybersecurity professionals, including myself, I will tell you, there is no such thing as 100% protected. You can be protected today and attacked tomorrow. We saw this. Let's think about the Target breach in 2013. I think that's what happened. And they had just completed some major assessments and some evaluations, and everything. They was given a clean bill of health. But that one thing that nobody thought to check, third-party support having illegal access, is what caused the demise of Target during that attack. So we need to leverage best practices like multi-factor authentication, using passwords manager, being alert, playing cybersecurity defense. You gotta play it every day, every day. Continuous training. Your training should never stop, never stop. We should always be training to become more aware of what's happening from a cybersecurity perspective. And the one thing we need enhanced security awareness. Every time we get an opportunity to look at new techniques, tactics, and procedures that cyber criminals are using to exploit us, to hurt us, we should train immediately on that. And the reason we should train immediately on that is so that people can become aware, so people can be properly trained and become a censor for themselves, your organization, the government, rather than not being trained and becoming a victim. It's almost like, the thing we say that's very cliche, when if you see something, say something. So people can't say anything that they're unaware of. Once we train them and teach them to have strong security awareness of the latest techniques, tactics, and procedures that cyber criminals are using, then people are better, have a better awareness, and they can be more help to the organization. And now I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. So I would like to start with the people that posted their questions here. And someone wrote, what do you think might be some of the biggest challenges in arriving to an international definition of cybercrime that at least some countries can agree to? That's a great question. And I really feel the best way to approach that is approach it through some of our international organizations like United Nations, and there's several others out there. We can work from there. I think we also have to understand that the impact of businesses, like for instance, if Apple's going to be operating in China, I think China owes some security and support to Apple, and vice versa. I think the one thing that we have to understand is that as long as we stand in the way and we don't work together to come up with international legislation that has teeth, then we're going to continue to see this over and over again. I personally believe that in this case, countries should be willing to work together, especially if they can prove from a forensics aspect that the attackers were sitting in your country and they were attacking in the United States, or they were sitting in the United States and attacking in South Africa. Those two countries must be willing to work together to solve it, and they must be committed to it. Because as long as we keep pointing towards each other, around each other, and over each other, we're never going to get to a point to where we're going to be able to solve this. The next question, do you have any thoughts about how authorities might approach the issue of jurisdiction? I think I just covered some of that. But yeah, this is, as you can see from the question, this is a serious issue. We came across this a lot in our research, and we didn't particularly hit on it. We didn't really include it in this particular research project, because we're going to come back and we're going to talk about how do you build international jurisdictions for something like cybercrime. Because the one thing that I would tell you, the world is a lot smaller due to the internet, and because of that, countries are going to have to learn to get out of their comfort zone and have international laws and policies that enable them to be just as effective in another country and vice versa. It's kind of like, giving some leeway. I help you, you help me, we help each other, because the only way that we're going to be able to eradicate cybercrime is having stronger jurisdictions between countries for prosecution. Right now, we do not have that. It's very tasking and taxing for countries to prosecute cybercrime because we just don't have the infrastructure in place. And so this is where organizations like Interpol and some other organizations can be beefed up to give them the ability to fight cybercrime. And the other one said internal bad actors. A third, understand the enemy from within. That's very true. People, you do have bad actors, and this is why it's very important to have an insider threat program. The insider threat program can help you put parameters in place and even highlight those individuals who might be potential bad actors. And so you can never turn your back and think that everybody inside your organization is a good guy. The hard part about this, though, is that when you have good people that do bad things unintentionally. And so that makes it that much more challenging. And so that's why when there's something that goes wrong, you really have to identify the intent. Was it intentional or was it unintentional? And then once you identify that, you're able to move on to the next round of the investigation. Do you think governments should play a role, if any, in helping institutions in their countries from hospital, university, protect themselves against cybercrime? Absolutely. We see this in terms of critical infrastructure. And so if you look at the critical infrastructures we have here in the United States, other countries have critical infrastructure as well. And so the government plays a huge role in protecting critical infrastructure. And so the government has a responsibility to make sure we maintain those essential services at any given time. I just gave not a lecture, but a talk at MXD, a manufacturing digitalization conference up in Chicago, where I talked about banking as a critical infrastructure. You see how the banking industry is very forward-leaning, where they're transitioning from physical banks to more of a mobile bank. And so when you look at that, that footprint grows even that much, that surface attack area increases exponentially. So from a critical infrastructure aspect, that means the critical infrastructure protection for banks allowing mobile banking has to grow with it. So that increases the demand and a lot of support from the government. So how do we do that? And so we got to start thinking differently about cybercrime and how do we support organizations from being victim by understanding the physical barriers where we used to, like a building, is no longer the ideal. We should also start thinking about the connection points and the endpoints and everything. So this is where we got to get to. And somebody wrote cyber money laundering. This is a great point too. And this is why in most ransomware attacks, they really want to get away from money. They really want to get into terms of cryptocurrency, thinking that it's going to allow them to remain anonymous, right? But we see cases where the FBI has been extremely invested in these cases and they're able to intervene. But again, the FBI has finite resources, and they can't do this consistently and continuously on top of everything else that they're trying to do. And so this is where I really feel like having stronger policies, legislations, and jurisdiction can give us a stronger effort to prosecute people when it comes to cybercrime. But cyber money laundering is definitely something else that we have to consider, because when cyber criminals make money, the one thing they also got to think about is, how do I get that money into some type of financial institution, or how do I get it to a point to where I can get it and use it? And the dark web, cryptocurrency, that's what everybody's using right now. I shouldn't say everybody, most people in the dark web are using cryptocurrency for their transactions.
Thank you. It seems there are no more questions. Thank you, Professor Nobles, for such a comprehensive presentation. I mean, there is definitely a lot more. And I guess one of the things is that we all need to be continuously training. And that is just
something that has to happen, considering that these threats continue evolving and adapting to the ways in which we all defend themselves, from individuals to organizations to large government institutions. There's a lot to think about. So thank you again, Professor Nobles, and thank you everybody for attending this panel. We hope to see you in our next sessions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.